Hi there everyone, I hope you're doing well today. I'm sure at this point many of you have seen Gary Neville's absolutely idiotic take which he posted on social media, the absolute bozo, essentially blaming patriotic Brits raising flags up and down the country for the recent attack on the Jews in Manchester by a radical Islamist. Now, we all know this is absolutely nuts, it's appalling, it's pretty disgraceful form. However, Gary is one of these woke idiots, we'll get into that. But we've explored many times on the channel why people like Gary are like this. I mean, first of all, as I've been exploring in recent videos, they simply have to view the world through the liberal frame. One, because it's psychological safety, and two, because it makes them feel morally superior. And this is why Gary, like other sort of champagne socialisty types, can't accept that mass immigration and multiculturalism will create issues. Because if they accept that, it undermines their whole ideology, which is basically, it's always whitey bad, always the West is bad. Or at least in his case, he kind of explains it way as right wing. But if you admit that there are problems that the groups coming here bring, then that undermines the whole of the blank slate liberal project. So, of course, they have to do absolutely everything to try and twist things back to their worldview, which is what Gary's done. Clearly, he's been, humiliated by this because it's absolutely ridiculous what he said. Whether he'll recognise how ridiculous it is remains to be seen, but he's certainly been caught out amongst the public. I mean, it's just complete madness what he's saying. And again, I think what's interesting about this is, you get this with some of the football types, Gary Neville, chief amongst them. They sort of present themselves as good old working class lads, And while they may have grown up like that, they haven't been like that for a long time. And I think it's worth remembering that. Gary Neville has lived a life of pampered luxury since his early teens, maybe even earlier. And, credit to the guy. Becoming a professional footballer isn't easy. He's obviously got lots of talent, worked hard. When he's not speaking about politics, he seems like an all right guy, So fair play to him on that front. But he's not this working class lad done well. He's lived a pampered life, really, like I say, from his early teens. And while he sort of makes out he's part of that community, he clearly isn't. He can afford to have these luxury beliefs. He's part of the liberal elite, and that's why he loves the Labour Party so much. He's perfect for the modern Labour Party. He might still live by the fantasy that it's the same Labour Party of old that represents the working man, but clearly not, because when a radical Islamist attacks some Jews, Gary Neville blames the working man, which is very typical of the modern Labour Party. Another thing worth adding quickly is remembering that Gary is part of the liberal elite, and I've spoken before, even my own experiences in London, obviously they were nothing like Gary's, but I can see what they sometimes mean when you're working in an office and there's people from all over the world. It kind of gives you this surface level understanding of what multiculturalism is. And I've said before, it's why lots of the liberal elite just can't understand the complaints of the average person on the street, because to them they think, yeah, but I have people here from China or Pakistan or France. And what they don't realise is these people they're with are the elite of those countries, and they're all got this shared mission, they all have the kind of shared liberal values, so they have this kind of idealised view of what multiculturalism is. If you're a man on the street and you've seen your town swallowed by a town from the third world that's all moved over, you don't have the same experience, If you've had grooming gangs in your city, pardon me, or your town, you don't have the same experience. If a terror attack has happened down the road from you, again, you don't have the same experience. So again, you have to think that their solution of just, we need to be more, pro-diversity, it's really just a plaster over a knife wound. And unfortunately, that's a literal metaphor given what's happened. Now, understanding all of this helps us frame the core point of this video. And Gary, in his video on social media, utilises experiences of playing for Manchester United as a rationale as to why multiculturalism is good. Now, don't worry if you don't know much about football, because it's more the analogy I'm getting to here with the decline of Britain, which went completely over Gary's head, as you might imagine. Now, the core point from the top is, as I've already intimated, Gary lives a life of luxury, and even playing at Man United, he doesn't seem to realise that they're extremely rare conditions he was enjoying there. Massive fame, massive wealth, Your every want and need is taken care of by a vast team of people, from health experts to dietary experts. Anything you need in your life is provided for. And again, even when he speaks about the shared purpose that he had with these differing players from Africa and Europe and so on, he misses the point that, of course, they were united by a sort of transient purpose, i.e. winning stuff in the short term. And of course, that doesn't really map on to national and cultural belonging, unless you see Britain as a sort of business, which ironically Gary seems to. And again, that sort of UK PLC, as it's called, is the Homo economicus thing. We've been gutted out entirely. Our soul is removed, our culture is removed, our links to one another are removed, and all that matters now is line go up politics. That's why it's irrelevant if you're from Worksop or Timbuktu to this system. All that matters is what you can produce economically, because essentially you're a battery. Gary doesn't see the world that way because he's at the top of the system using all of the batteries, basically. So again, another thing that doesn't add on with all of this is Gary is referencing his time when Man United were super successful. Even if you don't like football, you'll know Manchester United. In the 90s, they were massive. It was their era. And arguably the noughts as well. I mean, Chelsea grew a bit then with Mourinho, you might know. But broadly speaking, it was the 90s which really made United what they were. They were always big, but they really grew into themselves in that era. And looking back at that 90s United side, there's something very key about it that Alex Ferguson always structured in his sides. And there is no doubt that Ferguson did bring in foreign players, and that was part of the magic of United. We'll get onto that. But he always had a dependable British base in his team. Yes, that means the best of the Brits and the Irish too, Roy Keane and so on. But broadly speaking, that was United's identity. So when we think about Bayern Munich in Germany, they tended to have, and still do, the best German players. Real Madrid get the best Spanish players. So there's sort of an identity in that in and of itself. But it was more than just that, because Ferguson would often buy, I wouldn't quite say mediocre, I'd say good players, but maybe not great players. You know, they weren't world beaters. They weren't people setting, the headlines alight every weekend, but they were really dependable. For those who like football, I'm talking, Steve Bruce, Gary Pallister, Michael Carrick, Tom Cleverley, Johnny Evans, these sort of British players who, again, weren't absolutely brilliant, but almost created a nucleus of a side, gave it an identity. And that kind of was what made United so special, because if you think about Cantona, the archetypal 90s United player, he was a player who was built on that British base, if you like. The 90s mentality, British mentality was sort of blood and thunder style, very aggressive, all action, very watchable. But it was also kind of working class. It was about discipline, it was about structure, it was about, manning up and playing on. Cantona brought this flair and this grace and this style, and that's, I think, is one of the things that made the Premier League really watchable and great, was that you had these players who were like artists. And I remember playing football growing up, and I remember one lad had white boots. This is in the 90s where everyone had black boots. That was the standard. And this kid turned up with white boots. Now, he was a striker, and I remember our manager at the time said, if you go and score a hat-trick at the weekend, we'll let you get away with those white boots. But if you don't, we're going to take the piss out of you. Now, that's very British. It's a very working-class British approach to life. It's like you can have all the flair, but you've got to back it up. If you're having all this flair and you're not backing it up, it's a load of nonsense, and we don't like that. That's a very good value in there, actually. But anyway, the point is, that's, to my mind, why Cantona was so loved. He had flair, he wore his collars up, but he backed it up. You could say the same with Arsenal, actually. They had a very strong British base when Wenger came in, the defence with Tony Adams and Keown, very hard British players, and he built the flair on top of that with Henry and Vieira and so on. But the point I'm making here is, this is like a metaphor for multiculturalism in a way. As I've said before, I'm not some totalist who wants to kick everybody out of the country who's non-British. I do unironically believe you can have some benefits with immigration. Like I've said before, if you're careful about who you bring in, if they actually add to the country in terms of cultural output, economic output, spiritual output, there's all manner of ways in which people can do that, but the numbers have to be measured. So the heart of the nation, its soul, isn't being removed, isn't being ripped apart. Of course, again, we're decades past that in Britain now, but you can kind of see it in the football analogy, And this is the point I'm making with regards to Manchester United. Ferguson always had that base and then built the flair players on top of that, which you could say could be an analogy for immigration. But in this day and age, if you look at the most recent United lineup, they had 2 British players in their starting 11, and that's quite high for United. Sometimes they have none. And the point is that they've lost that base, and I think it's a key reason of why they've lost their identity. You know, it's part of a team, a major team in a nation, is to have players of that nation in it. And you can see this again, it's not just on the pitch that you see this. If you actually go to a Premier League football game, they're not really like they were back in the day. You know, I used to go to football a lot when I was young, and you'd always see the supporters of the team would be from that city. And I went up to Anfield, that's Liverpool's stadium, a few years ago, about 10 years ago or something. And I was surprised by the amount of Chinese there. I'm not saying, Chinese can't go to games, Stasi, don't get OTT. Of course they can go, but the point I'm making is the average Scouser just isn't really there anymore. And when you watch Liverpool, very often, they're supposed to have this amazing atmosphere, but very often it seems a bit quiet to me. And I think, again, it's because the average Scouser has been priced out. I think that's happened at Man United as well. Not to mention, their stadium is falling apart. We'll get to that in a minute. But I also want to speak on even the style of play of modern football speaks to modernity. Again, I mentioned earlier, the 90s was all about all-action play, very much blood and thunder, tackle hard and leave your leg in, that sort of thing. But it also had this creative freedom. If you had a good player, like a Cantona or a Bergkamp, you just say, look, just do what you're going to do, because you're so good. And that made it so watchable, because you'd have these almost genius artistic players. Every game they'd do something magical. I remember, me and my friends used to watch Match of the Day to see what Henry did, Now that's largely gone in the modern game, because it's been replaced by this kind of robotic, highly drilled, high possession, high press, almost post-tiki-taka style. Tiki-taka means just holding onto the ball and passing it. Lots of short passes developed by Pep Guardiola. But again, this is really symbolic of modernity, because it's sort of ruled by the specialist, ruled by the technocrat, ruled by the managerial elite. Your own expression goes, and in comes very hard and fast rules that you must follow. And again, well, why? It's so you can basically move towards this endless desire for profit and success, which is what football is really about now, Then you throw into that the endless manufactured social justice causes. I mean, it's one thing that drives many football fans nuts about football these days. They're always doing something, whether it's BLM or gay people or women commentators, telling you all about the game. And you're thinking, I played at a higher standard than you. I mean, why am I listening to you? And of course, like the Gary Nevilles of the world, they all slavishly follow the dictates of the liberal regime. And what we can see, or what I think has happened in football culture, is this manufactured liberalism is sort of replacing organic heartland culture, that was very key to Britain. And again, why the Premier League was so popular, because there was a bit of fun to football. If you go along to a football game, they're trying to oust it more and more, but you'd have very edgy chants from fans to other fans, and it kind of made it part of the drama. They've replaced that now with ideas of, the football family, which is just a load of nonsense to basically try and water down the quality of the culture of football, really. But the point I'm making here, and the ultimate point to get to, is when we look at United, Gary Neville's beloved United, they are run, just like Britain, by finance capital. I mean, they're run by these Glazers from America, and you can see, to them, the situation on the ground or the pitch, just like in Britain, is irrelevant to the powers that be. The financiers don't care about the state of Britain. They don't care about the state of Man United. What matters to them is turnover, growth, profit, that you say the right things and parrot the messages of the liberal regime. That's all they care about. Maybe not so much the liberal regime stuff with the Glazers, but they certainly don't care about the performance on the pitch. They care about profit and turnover, no matter the social, cultural, spiritual cost. And that goes for United and for Britain. And you can see this in how the Glazers have treated Man United. They basically conducted what's called a leveraged buyout, as I understand it. The finance boffins, feel free to correct me, but as I understand it, they bought out United not because they have a passion for the club or a passion for football or a passion for the fans, but because they saw it was a highly profitable organisation. And they knew that they could borrow vast amounts of sums of money to buy Man United, And they had such good financial stability in Man United and growth potential that they could use the cash flow of United to service the debt they took out to purchase it in the first place, as well as other debts they have in their portfolio. So again, this is why so many United fans have felt that they're losing the club. It's effectively become a vector through which big financiers can utilise or operate their own day-to-day financial operations. So again, you can see this is a direct metaphor for what's happened to Britain. It's UK PLC. All of our national institutions have been gutted out by neoliberalism. It feels like we've lost our soul. Everything is about line go up politics. And this is the core point of the video that I think Gary Neville one day hopefully will get wise to. What ails Britain and Man United isn't working class white guys putting up flags in their town because they feel like they're being taken over. It's the neoliberal system itself which is eating them both alive and gutting them out. But that's also something that people like Gary Neville, support and actively agitate for. That very neoliberalism that's destroying the club he loves and the country he supposedly loves is the very thing. So again, I don't think that Gary Neville is necessarily a bad person. I just think he's an idiot. I just don't think he's really thought thoroughly into this. And again, he's clearly possessed by what I call progressive moral theology. The idea that if I'm liberal and leftist, kind of vaguely, I'm a good person, I'm loving, I'm tolerant, I'm against hate, And again, Gary Neville's the perfect Blairite in many ways because, he espouses all these values, working class lad, but then the way he acts in his own organisations, which I don't mind, by the way, it's just the hypocrisy that bothers me. He's an out-and-out capitalist, in his actual behaviour. Very, very sort of Blairite energy there. But again, when he's speaking in his videos about how we have to return in the country back to love and tolerance and all this sort of stuff, what he's talking to there, it's not love and care that's coming out of him there. It's the progressive moral theology. It's the presenting himself as a good person without realising he's a massively sheltered elite who doesn't understand what life is like for the average person, and the average person doesn't want to know what he thinks about it. They'll listen to his views on football, but that's about it. But more broadly speaking, you can tell he's got that venom in him for the patriotic British working class. Because again, that's another key thing about progressive moral theology. Those people are evil. But they're the very people he's supposed to be from. And his club was supposed to represent, and the Labour Party are supposed to represent. But they don't at all, because again, the whole thing has been sold out by neoliberalism, both economically and culturally, spiritually and socially. But I do believe that, look, it's annoying when people like Gary Neville behave this way. But look, he's just been shown up as just an idiot, hasn't he, really? So I think, people like his time, it's coming to an end. It really is, because people just aren't going to listen to this anymore. We're sick of being lectured to by sheltered multimillionaires who have no understanding what real life is like and say they love their country, but what they mean is they love being part of the elite and looking down on you and sneering. And I think people are getting sick of it. As I say, their time is coming to an end. He really should, as the name of his podcast is, stick to football. Anyway, these are some of my views, just a little rant. Do let me know what you think down below. Do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.